야, 여러분, 재밌는 소식이 하나 있습니다. 우리 대부 방송하면 항상 나와가지고 러시아 방송에서 나와가지고 막 이건 이렇게 업데이트됐다, 저건 저렇게 업데이트됐다 이야기해주는 그 개발자 형 있잖아. 그 형이 실제 그 Q&A 하나 봐. Q&A를 한다는 지난번에 어저께 영상 올렸던 거 있었죠. 그거 실제 했고요. 자, 그거에 대한 건데 제가 앞부분 조금만 봤거든요. 제법 볼만한 부분 같아가지고 같이 보면서 또 어떤 질문과 답변했는지 제가 봐놓고 다시 보면 좀 새로운 게 없잖아. 그래서 한번 봐봅시다. 그리고 처음에 앞부분에 좀 본 게 이 형이 러시아 분이니까 러시아 말로 하잖아. 그래서 러시아 원어를 보려고 했거든요. 물론 원어를 보려니까 아무래도 우리가 영어는 그래도 어릴 때부터 맨날 주입식 교육이라고 좀 배웠잖아. 들으니까 이렇게 번역도 정확하지 않는데 러시아로 들으니까 이게 뭔 말인지 좀 알아듣기 힘들더라고요. 초반에 자기 소개하는 부분 있잖아. 그래도 자기가 이름을 말하는 부분은 우리가 한번 들어줘야 될 것 같고요. 그 다음 부분에는 영어 더빙된 부분을 이렇게 보겠습니다. 참고하세요. 그리고 이 형의 이름은 정확하게 뭐냐면은 볼라니코프라고 하는데 이거를 이제 구글링에서 들어보면 이겁니다.
Вячеслав Буланников.
비치슬로프 볼라니코프. 근데 이 발음 자체는 그 자체 발음이 있을 거니까 우리가 발음을 정확하게 하는 건 알 겁니다. 근데 비치슬로프 볼라니코프인데 이제 볼라니코프 형이라고 합시다. 볼라니코프 형. 자, 그러면 이 형님이 어떤 Q&A를 했는지 보고요. 그리고 이게 영문 사이트 가니까 Q&A 하고 난 다음에 밑에 그 댓글도 제법 달렸더라고요. 요것도 한번 봐보면 재밌을 겁니다. 자, 아무튼 자, 본 영상 한번 내용 한번 봐봅시다. Let's go. 자, Q&A.
Всем привет, меня зовут Вячеслав Буланников, я руководитель проекта War Thunder. Сегодня отвечу на вопрос сообщества.
Hey everyone, my name is Vyacheslav Bulanikov, and I'm the game director for War Thunder. Today, I'll be answering some of the community's
자,
questions.
조금 전에 했던 말
When will the game's
알아듣겠어요.
interface be updated?
It'll never be updated.
Interface
But
updates,
seriously, in a project of this scale with such a long lifespan, a complete and sudden overhaul of the interface is always extremely stressful, both for the people playing the game and the team working on it. For players, because everything suddenly looks different, which brings mixed feelings and strong feelings as well. Some like it, some don't. For developers, because the interface is enormous. I'm not even sure what the player meant by interface. We have so many different types,
유튜브가
in-game,
인터페이스
research, and so on. But in any case, it's a massive amount of work.
그래서
And
너무
if you
자주
replace
안
it
바꿨으면
entirely,
좋겠어.
a huge number of bugs will
천천히.
inevitably appear, all of which need to be fixed.
저
So
말은
that's
전
why I say it'll
공감합니다.
never be updated.
인터페이스는
Instead,
보조적으로
we
가야 돼.
follow an evolutionary approach to interface development. That means we constantly change and improve individual parts, making things more convenient, adding new features. This way, it's much easier for us to gather feedback from the community on a specific change or feature. And on the other hand, we don't overwhelm players who aren't interested or affected by those changes. So the interface is always evolving. You can actually see how much it's changed over the past year. Just compare your old screenshots if you've been playing for a while. Before and after really tells the story.
Will anti-radar missiles be added?
Yes, the
레이더 미사일은
game is
계속
getting
추가될
more and
건가요?
more large
네,
SAM
그렇습니다.
systems, which are exactly the kind of
다음
targets those
업데이트에도
missiles are designed
일본하고
for. Even though we're a bit
이탈리아인가
skeptical
세고
about how
나온답니다.
effective they'll be compared to other fire-and-forget
미사일.
weapons already in War Thunder. After all, long-range,
말사-
high-speed
하이엔
missiles
포기
of that
미사일도 많이
kind are
나온
quite
듯하네.
common now. ARMs could still introduce an interesting gameplay mechanic to the game. Besides that, anti-radar missiles could also serve as a way to recon enemy positions. So our plan is as follows. If we add them, we'll refine the interface in such a way so that when you use such a missile, you'll roughly see where the enemy SAM is located. So yes, we plan to introduce them, I think,
나오지
most likely in the first half of
레이더
next year.
대응 미사일
Will the
있잖아.
survivability of tactical and long-range bomber aircraft improve?
폭격기의
Yes,
생존성
we're
향상될
not
수
fully
있을까요?
satisfied with how these aircraft are currently set up. Their current parameters aren't
현재는
realistic
만족하지
enough.
않는다.
They're simply way too fragile, and that makes those planes that are already quite challenging to use even less competitive when facing fighters of their respective battle ratings.
Will we get an artillery sight for indirect fire on SPGs?
Nope, that's not planned. You have to understand, such a sight would look extremely unrealistic, and it wouldn't really fit a game like War Thunder. On top of that, you also have to understand that it wouldn't make indirect fire as easy as some of you might expect. The reason for that is that the main limitation when firing from behind cover isn't the lack of a special sight, it's the trajectory. For most artillery vehicles available in-game, the minimum firing range can actually exceed the size of War
일종의
Thunder's
게임 내
maps, so that
자주포
kind of
같은
sight just
능력을
wouldn't help
주거나 이
you
말
at
아니야.
all. That said, the
말도 안
game
되잖아.
already includes pretty realistic ways to perform indirect fire, if the trajectory actually allows it. You can do artillery spotting using a drone, artillery spotting through another vehicle or an aircraft. You can also set the range manually using the azimuth scale. All the realistic
그런
methods
거를
are already
조절하는
there,
것
so you can
자체가
absolutely
재미잖아.
use those.
예.
Are there any mechanics in the
자동화면 안
works
되지.
to improve team play and add more
플레이
depth to the
위한
game?
메커니즘.
Yep, there are some ideas we're considering, especially in the context of modern aviation. But for now, it's simply too early to speak about them.
Are you going to fix
핸드핑
naval
좀 찍기
battles?
편하게 해줬으면 좋겠어.
Over the past
핸드핑.
few years, we've made a huge number of changes and fixes to naval gameplay. The firing mechanics were overhauled, damage models received major updates, locations were reworked in a big way. Basically, a lot of work has been done. In the upcoming update, which might already be out by the time you see this, we're introducing another major feature related to damage control and ship survivability. So yes, that means we're constantly improving the naval mode and doing it in parallel with adding new content to naval battles as well, with each update bringing new ships to the game.
When will smoke artillery be added?
연막은 언제
We're not planning to
추가되나요?
add a separate smoke artillery feature. On the one hand, there's no need for it, as the game already has vehicles capable of deploying smoke screens in a variety of different ways. On the other hand, that kind of artillery could easily become a toxic mechanic and not just a helpful tool. It might end up blocking visibility and interfering with teammates rather than helping them. We've actually tested smoke artillery in special events, even in situations where those events involved players with good communication and coordination. It never gained much popularity in its primary use. More often than not, it simply became a tool for griefing opponents and making gameplay worse for everyone. So we're not planning to introduce standalone smoke artillery anymore.
연락 포병을
When will
도입하지
White
않을
Rock
거다.
Fortress
포병.
return to the game?
This map is
연막하면 되는
currently in active development. There's a good chance we'll bring it back in its updated form before the end of the year.
Remember when you said you won't add top-tier premiums? What happened to that?
We already gave a detailed answer to this back in the summer of 2023. Even though the game now includes premium vehicles of the highest rank, we still don't plan to add top-tier premiums that would be exceptionally effective or strong, better than their peers, in terms of flight characteristics, armament, and so on. The idea is that unlocking top-tier vehicles through the regular tech tree should still offer something new and give you an advantage or capability that even the best premium vehicles don't have. That's why we have no plans to introduce premium vehicles with top-level combat performance.
Air RB enduring confrontation tests were beloved by the community. Can we expect to see Air RB EC in the future?
We're not planning to replace the current Air RB with an RB version of Enduring Confrontation or somehow mix EC into the regular random battles. We've already tried adding EC-style missions to Air RB as a separate event, but they didn't gain much popularity among players. So it's not really our decision, it's just the reality shaped by player experience and preferences. That said, we completely understand that some players are interested in trying something fresh, something new, and we are already working on that something, a new mode in fact. It's called Aerial Warfare.
Are there any plans to introduce more WW2 vehicles to make
차례전 차량도
mid-range BRs
추가합니까?
more diverse?
I checked. Each year, we add about
매년
30 to
30,
40
40
vehicles
차량이
from the
들어가지고
first half of the 20th century. Given how many mid-rank vehicles are already in the game and how well those parts of the tech tree are filled out, adding even more vehicles of that era doesn't make
추가하는
much
건
sense.
큰 의미가
That's
없는
why
것
we
같다.
more often than not use those kinds of vehicles in special events and activities. Still, there are
그러니까
quite a few
터리에서 좀
interesting
빈 게
vehicles
있는
from
것
that
같으면
era that
추가하지
can and will be
그렇지
added
않으면
over
안 한다 이
time.
말인 것 같다.
It's insane to see how much of the map is blocked off in the new North Holland map.
Maps aren't actually getting smaller. They're designed to be the size the level designer intended them to be. Every location has a mission variant that uses the full map area. The missions that look smaller than usual, the ones people usually mean, are actually special modes with just one or a few capture points. The idea behind those specific missions is to offer fast, action-packed gameplay where you can play very aggressively. Both sides clash quickly, fights happen right away, everybody gets frags, and players know
뭐
where to find the
실제랑
enemy.
맵이 좀
The
다르다 이
time between
말이야.
spawning and spotting your
이에
first
대한
target
불만인가?
is short on purpose. That's why these modes, built with this
게임적인
specific
그런
gameplay in
게 있어야
mind,
된다 생각.
use a limited play
뭔지 알죠?
area. The whole idea is to keep players focused on fighting each other so that they
플레이어를
get all that
집중시키는
action
것이다.
instead of just spreading out all over the
그치,
map,
너무
because
흩어지는
that
게
slows
문제잖아요.
everything
그게
down.
공중전
But that's
시뮬맵에서
just one
나오잖아.
type of mission
사실 맵
available to
크기를
you.
보면
So it's not
시뮬맵이
accurate to
크긴
say
하지만 그래
that maps
엄청난
themselves
크기는
are shrinking.
아니거든요.
In fact, those smaller
문제는
mission variants
미니맵스가
have a
너무
much
흩어져
lower
있으니까
chance of
사람들도
appearing in
흩어지니까.
matchmaking compared to
시뮬맵을
regular
위배를
missions.
가운데
So they're
모아두잖아요.
actually
그러니까
quite
가운데
rare.
모일 겁니다.
Why are copy and paste vehicles added in place of more interesting, unique options?
복부 차량 너무
That's
많아요.
a bit of a misconception. We don't add such
오해입니다,
vehicles
오해.
instead of unique ones.
오해예요.
We add them alongside unique vehicles. There have been many cases where
원래
a vehicle
그런
appeared
차량이
on the
있는
dev server
겁니다.
in one
오해입니다.
nation's tech tree, even though a case could be made for its inclusion in
오해노노.
other tech trees, as they also use the vehicle in
우리가
real
일 쉽게
life.
하려고 복구를 하는
Players
거 아니다 이
themselves
말이에요.
would then insist that we should add the vehicle to other nations as well. After several rounds of that, we just decided that whenever possible, we'll include those shared vehicles in multiple tech trees right away. That doesn't mean, of course, that we don't have plans to add unique vehicles to the game. Far from it. Those are still being added and more planned. For instance, we've got unique self-propelled artillery vehicles and other vehicles in the works, so we're doing both, shared designs and original ones.
How is work on the World War mode progressing?
세계대전
When can
모드는
we
언제
expect it to
나오나요?
launch?
The World War mode is in continuous,
지속적이고
steady, though
안정적입니다.
not very
특별히
fast
빠르진
development.
않지만 개발하고 있다 이
We share
말이에요.
news and updates when we can, and return to work on it from
지금 뭐
time to
데이터
time.
모으는 중이잖아.
At the same time, we're currently prioritizing
6회공을
new
다
mechanics and
한 대
improvements for the main
집어넣으면
game. In other words,
가뜩이나
changes that
밸런스가
affect
막
the majority of
박살나는데
players.
엄청날
Just
것
recently, we
같아.
talked about our plans for developing aerial warfare and ran several
제가 보기에
playtests,
세계대전
including
모드
SCAD
나와도
and
모든
strategic
장비 타는
bombing
게 아니라
playtests. In the
정해진
future,
특정 장비
these
내에서 선택해야
and
될 것
similar
같아.
modes
느낌에.
could become special events within the aerial warfare system on the global map. We're planning to test more modes in the same way, as limited time event missions, so we can collect your feedback, make adjustments, and fix bugs. Once that process is complete,
갑자기 그
we'll
생각
start
든다. 이쯤에서
integrating
안톤이
those
직접
missions
좀
into a
인터뷰
separate,
한번 해야 되는 거 아니야?
full-fledged
안톤.
mode with operations and a global map. That's when World War, as its own game mode, will officially make its real
새로운 게임
debut.
모드로 듭니다. 보병 모드 이야기
There
나오려면
was a test
모르겠다.
of the PvE
PvE
mode
모드 테스트
recently.
진행되었습니다.
Are you continuing to
작업
work on it?
중인가요?
From time to time, we create unique or
똑똑한
themed
테마 있는
in-game
게임의
events
이벤트를
to give
만듭니다.
players something fresh and unusual, a little break from the regular missions and modes. This type of experimental content is probably best represented by our massive April Fool's events, which over the years have really become one of War Thunder's trademarks.
썬더
Still,
처음
every now
시작했을
and then,
때
we just like to have a bit of
공중전할
fun and
때
experiment with
라이언이
smaller events to
없어가지고
present something new to
뭐
players. Such events
폭격기들인가 막
can be
계속 오는데
one-time
웨이브
experience,
막는 거
or they might return in the
있어요.
future.
지금도 있을 겁니다.
Whenever we have
그거
news
하루에
about
한
these
번씩
or other
꼭 했어요.
comebacks,
너무
we
올라가.
always share it. One example
완전히
is the World War mode
꼼꼼하대.
that we already mentioned, in which players also had to
그런
attack fortified
느낌으로 하는 게
positions
세계대전
and
모드랍니다.
AI-controlled convoys, while
AI가 제안하고
defending
보상대를
against similar
공격하고 뭐 이런
attacks
거.
themselves.
Are there any plans for strategic
전략
bombers?
폭격기 계획은 그쵸 폭격기.
We don't have any plans to introduce those aircraft
이
as
항공기를 만들
top-tier
이유가
vehicles in our
가장
current
높은
meta.
스텔스
In other
레벨.
words, we don't see them as the pinnacle of aviation development in War Thunder. But as museum pieces, collector's aircraft,
수집용으로
or
이벤트
event
차량으로는
vehicles,
낼 수
yes,
있다.
strategic bombers might appear in
정규터리로
the game
내기는
sometime down the
밸런스상
line.
힘들다.
That's because there's definitely demand for them, and we understand that in certain special modes or simply as rare collectibles, they could be
B2 폭격기
interesting
이런 거
for
나오는
players.
거야.
So we're not ruling them out
이미
completely.
만들어 놓긴 했잖아.
Can we
보시면
expect
디자인.
a tighter battle rating spread of 0.7?
Combat strength isn't the only factor that affects gameplay. Variety matters too. If we narrow the BR spread, yes, the vehicles you encounter will be
BR 범위
closely
줄이는
matched
거는
in terms of their
앞쪽하는 거는
combat capabilities, but the overall diversity of vehicles you encounter will shrink as well. Given that most players tend to gravitate towards meta vehicles, reducing the BR
그러니까
range
좋은
would mean that
장비를
you
많이
wouldn't even
타는
meet the full
경향이
range of
있으니까.
opponents theoretically existing within that smaller range of BRs. On top of that, you have to understand the fact that narrowing the spread could significantly increase matchmaking times.
매치메이킹
Even
시간이
though
늘어날까
War
봐.
Thunder has a large player base, especially during peak hours, once you start factoring in things like server region, specific BR ranges, particular nations, or squadrons of several players, all of that together can
그러니까
already
이거는 좀
result
번역이
in
옳은지
noticeable
모르겠는데
queue times. And
이제
if we made the range
좀
even
더
tighter,
그
wait times
BR
could stretch
때를
into
좀
several
늘려달라
minutes
이 말인
or
것
even
같아, 그죠?
dozens of minutes. So the answer is no. We don't plan
그러기에는
to
위험하다.
change the
범위를
current
변경할
BR
계획은
spread.
없다.
Instead, we'll continue raising the upper BR limit,
대신에 BR을 더
gradually
위로 높일 때
achieving a
확장할
kind
거다.
of decompression that way.
압박 완화를 위해서.
Any news on the development of
잠수함.
submarines?
나왔다.
We're continuing to work on submarines,
계속하고
but
있습니다.
implementing such a complicated and
유연하기
controversial
복잡하다.
type of vehicle takes a lot of time.
논란의
The
여지.
biggest challenge is figuring out how to properly integrate submarines, which were never designed for large-scale fleet battles, into the very same fleet
저거는
battles that
일종의
basically make
특을
up
수도
the standard
있어요.
naval experience in War Thunder. And to do it in
세계
such a
대전
way that
모드하고
we somehow
비슷할 수도
don't
있어.
break the game
네,
for everybody else.
밸런스가
We're
맞출 수
very
있지 않을
grateful
겁니다.
to the community and to all
지상전에서
submarine
비행기
enthusiasts for their
주관과
patience, and we'll do our best to make sure that the final
그런
result
심한
meets your
느낌일 수도 있고.
expectations.
Are there any new game modes in the works? Players are tired of capturing zones.
We
게임
think
모드
that if
새로운
players
개발
were truly
중인가요?
tired of the classic missions with 1 or 3 objectives, they'd have already stopped playing and switched to something else. These modes are classic for a reason. They appeal to players with their simplicity and consistency, letting them focus more on actually fighting the enemy rather than learning some complex mission rules or adapting to unpredictable mechanics. More elaborate missions with intricate objectives that would progress in some complicated fashion could work well with fewer, significantly fewer core mechanics or simpler mechanics. But in War Thunder, the scope and speed of what's happening, the sheer depth of vehicle control, and the number of possible actions already demand a lot in terms of player attention.
제가
Adding
썬더
extra
처음
layers
했을 때
of complexity
놀랐던
within the
게
missions
차량이
makes things much
다양한데
harder to follow and control. That's why
어지간한
we only introduce
차량들이
such experimental modes
고유
as
기능들이
temporary
다 구현이
events.
돼 있는
Not meant for
거.
everyone,
그건
but they give
놀랍더라고요.
players who want that chance to shake things
월탱하다
up a bit,
와서
have
사실
some fun with something
장식으로 뭐
that isn't just
달려있는 거
capturing
많았거든요.
points, and then return to the good old
실제
familiar
되는
game
거야.
modes with renewed vigor.
Are there any changes planned for squadron battles?
자,
The
비행대
Squadron
장비.
Battles mode has gone through several major changes since it was first introduced, evolving alongside the game itself and adapting to ships and player engagement and priorities. Its current state seems stable to us, meeting the needs of players. The rewards for participating in this mode also appear to be well balanced with the effort required, so we're
아,
not considering
비행대로
increasing this
하는
time.
무슨
When will
저거
we finally get
대-
the ability to
대전이
ban more than
그만인가
one map?
보네.
No. Because even right now, players already have the potential to
차단?
ban up to 32 maps in the worst case scenario.
맵의 뱀핑
That's
말하나?
16 versus 16 players, each banning one map, which removes 32 maps from the pool. And since not all maps are available at
너무
every battle
ban하면은
rating, this can already
수가 안
exclude more than
잡힌다.
half the maps we have in certain modes. So even the current ban system already noticeably reduces the variety of locations players see,
그러니까 사람들이
even
선호하지
if
않는
they
맵은 좀
personally ban
개선을
just
해.
one map.
예. 선호 안
Because
하는데
of
이유가 있을
that,
거 아니야.
we don't think increasing the number of bans would be beneficial. Instead, we're
최근에
focusing on a
같은
variety
맵이
of
연속으로
measures
안
that
걸리게 하는
prevent
뭐
players from being
알고리즘을
placed on the same map several
넣었다더라고요.
times in a
확실히
row.
좀덜
Why does
걸리는
that
것
happen?
같아. 예.
Because the
맨날
map selection
스페인만
process
하고 막
is
이렇게 돼야
utterly
의심을 먹게
random.
되고.
Even with a well-shuffled map
사라져서.
list that avoids immediate repeats,
대신에
as it
큐가 좀
works now,
잡히는 시간이
there's
좀
no
길어진다.
guarantee that you won't end up on the same map twice or more in a row. For example,
저기
you finish a
그 이야기
17-minute
하네요.
match,
같은
wait
맵
3 minutes,
계속 안
queue
걸리게
again,
하려고
and you get the
노력하는데
same mission even though in
여기다가
reality it
맵뱅까지
only
하면은
reappeared
큐 잡히는데 몇
19
시간 오래
minutes
걸린다.
later. Unfortunately, that can happen several times in a row just by chance. It's randomness. It's also important to remember that map bans and dislikes work on top of all that and further reduce the available pool of maps you can be matched on, the pool you're personally drawing from, which amplifies the issue. So we're currently developing a system that takes a player's recent match history into account and filters out maps they or others currently in the queue have recently played. This should reduce
이 형님 이 부분에
significantly the
대해서
number of streaks,
그 뭐냐,
situations where you're placed
뱀픽에
in the same
대해서
map
갈
several
이야기가 많은가
times,
보다.
2 or more times in a row. By
그만큼
the
스트레스 많이
way,
받나
most
보다.
of the work on this system is already complete, and we're testing it even on live servers right now. Once we're confident everything's working properly, we'll roll it out everywhere, and, of course, we'll also make a corresponding official announcement.
Is there something planned to improve the player experience of the helicopter PvE game mode?
PvP battles involving helicopters are a very niche experience,
헬리콥터
something that appeals to a
만
rather
하는
small and
교전.
specific audience. That was clear from the limited popularity of the helicopter PvP mode, so we currently don't have any plans to bring it back in any form. As for
있잖아.
dedicated
그
helicopter
VR로 헬기
PvE,
잘
we
타는
don't have
게
any
있잖아.
active
갑자기
or
그
in-progress
생각이
plans for
헬기
its
이야기만
additional
나오죠.
development right now either. We believe it already offers enough variety in terms of goals, objectives, helicopters with different weapon loadouts. Moreover, since we added the option to research helicopters through ground battles, mainly by using the special option of converting earned experience, the relevance of dedicated helicopter PvP has naturally declined. After all, players experience helicopter versus helicopter combat as part of regular mixed battles.
Players leaving after one death in high-tier mixed battles makes this part of the game regularly unenjoyable. Do you have any potential solutions in mind?
Yes, we completely agree that when a large portion of one
아,
team
1데스만
leaves after
하고
their first
죽는 거.
deaths,
아,
it
그게
obviously
돼.
makes the battle
바샤통이다.
less enjoyable and less fair for everyone else,
그,
both your
어제 그
allies
해결책
and your
나왔죠.
opponents. But we also understand that
이제
players who leave can
랜덤하게
have
출격할 수
legitimate
있는
reasons to do
차량
that in real
네,
life.
랜덤 출격.
That's why
점수만
we're not
된다면.
really
네.
eager to introduce some sort of penalty that would force players to
대신에
stay. Instead,
뭐
we want to support
그 예를
those who
들어서
do want to
5.7에서
stay, to keep playing
6.7이면
but currently
6.7
can't
최상위
respawn.
장비는 안
For
주고
example,
중간
because they
이하
simply
장비로
don't have more
랜덤하게
vehicles
주는 거예요.
available. Maybe they're on a new premium or squadron vehicle, just unlocked a new tier,
꼭
have
필요한
only
것
one
같습니다.
vehicle
덱을
for
짜서
it.
출격해야
And that's it.
된다면
To
공중전은
help such
상관없는데
players,
지상전은
and as a
꼭
way
필요할
to
것
solve
같아요.
this problem, at least partially, we've already implemented a system where every premium vehicle comes with a bundle of backups by default. We also announced our plans to implement free daily backups in the latest
매일
community
뮤르게테
update.
타량도 주고
On top
그렇죠.
of that,
네,
we're
그리고
exploring other ways to solve the
안에서
issue. For
들어가면
instance, by
5회인가
adding a random
재출격할
vehicle
수 있는
slot
카드
in ground battles,
있잖아.
similar
그것도 주죠.
to how it works for aircraft in naval battles. That way, players without a suitable vehicle for their current battle rating could still respawn using this special additional slot,
덱으로
where
만드는
a
순간
random vehicle
덱이
would be
넉넉한
provided
사람하고
for them.
넉넉하지 않은
This would let
사람은
even
이게
single
차이가 날
vehicle
수밖에
players
없어.
respawn more than once,
제가
especially
시상전
when
할 때
combined with the backup mechanic.
소련을 처음 뚫었거든요.
In a
못해도
PvP
덱은
game,
다 채웠어.
it's frustrating to be killed by something you can't counter, new FNF missiles. Is this something you consider when adding powerful
아이엠4기
weaponry?
미사일들.
Yes, we do. However, in any kind of asymmetrical gameplay, situations like this are the natural result of that very asymmetry. For example, a piston-engine aircraft with the bomb engaging a tank without an anti-aircraft gun is an encounter even less fair. In fact, in the game, target-seeking missiles launched from aircraft or helicopters can be very easy to evade, simply by hiding behind cover or deploying smoke. Those same missiles can also be intercepted and destroyed by friendly SBAA or SAM units. Compare that to a simple, unguided bomb dropped from low altitude directly onto a tank, something that constantly happens at mid-range. It's often much harder to avoid. That's why the more diverse the lineup in a battle, the greater the variety of vehicles and differences between your vehicle and the ones you run into, the more interesting and varied the encounters themselves can be. Unfortunately, that also means that some of those situations will inevitably feel unfair to one side.
Do you have plans to add regenerative steering into the game?
Implementing a realistic turning system that simulates double differential steering could indeed reduce power loss during turns. However, it would also make vehicles less maneuverable compared to the current turning model, which simulates clutch and brake steering. With such a change, it would no longer be possible to make sharp, high-speed turns by pivoting around a braked track. That's why we're considering whether introducing more realistic turning mechanics would actually be beneficial, like the twin transmission or double differential steering system. In certain situations, these changes would significantly affect vehicle handling in a bad way. We're considering letting players try this out on a public test server first. Based on your feedback, we'll decide whether to implement it in the main game.
There are situations where one team has
있다,
4
눈치
top
보는데.
BR players and the other 1. This makes the match less
그치
fair.
탑 BR이
Can the
아군은
matchmaker
많고
match
적군은
these
많고
4
아군은 한
players
명도
on
없거나
either
한
team
명이거나
as
뭐
a
이럴
guarantee?
때 매칭
Matchmaking doesn't just limit the number of players with top BR vehicles. It also uses
수량을
several
제한할
other
거,
rule sets to
BR
make
기준을 안
matches more
맞춘다.
balanced. For example, it restricts how large the total BR difference between both teams can be. But it's important to understand that even if you were to play 20 to 30 consecutive matches in perfectly balanced teams, where everyone was using vehicles of the exact same battle rating, even the same model,
완전히
you'd
똑같게
still
할 수는
sometimes
없다.
stomp the enemy very easily, and sometimes
그거는
get
이제
stomped
인정합니다.
just as easily. You might end up
그리고
winning or losing
예전에는
80% of those
그런
matches despite the
밸런스가
identical
너무 딱
setups,
맞아야
even though
된다고
everything was perfectly balanced,
근데
even though you were all sitting at the
요즘에는
same
좀
BR
생각이
using the
바뀌었습니다.
same vehicle. That's because
밸런스가
the outcome
맞으면
of
안
a battle
된다는 말이
depends
아니라
not only on the vehicle but on the
밸런스보다 더
players
중요한 게
themselves.
게임적
On the other
재미
hand,
같아.
the stricter the
재미가
matchmaking rules are,
있다면
the longer the
밸런스는
wait
왜
times
필요 없어.
become.
우리는
We mentioned this
재미있으려고 하는
before.
거지.
In
밸런스만
some
주려고 하는 게
cases, it
아니잖아.
might even
네.
become impossible to find a
그걸 잘
suitable
알아야
match
돼.
for
비슷한
certain
것
players
같은데
at
이건
all.
좀 다른
As a
의미야.
result,
네.
those players would be unable to play and would leave the game for
밸런스만
good.
맞추다가
What I want
게임
to say is
재미를
that at
자꾸
the end of the
날려버리고
day,
팩
setting up a
넣고
matchmaking
이러면은
system
그냥 그게
is always a compromise
왜 할
between
이유가
tighter
없잖아.
balance,
재미가
which
없는데.
only partly determines the outcome anyway, and reasonable
중요한
queue
것 같아요.
times.
Battle
그거는 좀
rating
이해하고 있는
changes
것 같아,
often
다행히
cause
개발자들이.
vehicles that are played by less players to have artificially higher stats. Do you keep this in mind when making BR changes?
If changes to battle ratings were made purely based on
BR
server
변경은
statistics
서브 통계만
without
하는
any
게
human
아니다.
involvement, that would of course be very convenient. We wouldn't have to spend hundreds of man-hours preparing each update to battle ratings,
승률만
and we
보고
usually do that
BR을
around 5 times a
높이거나
year.
낮추지 않는다.
Right
이
now, when
말이에요.
adjusting
그러니까 이게
BRs, our
뭐냐니까
game designers
선다가 어느
start with a
순간부터
statistical data for each
1, 2년
vehicle, but they
전부터
also take into account their own understanding of
기체
its
자체
strengths and
성능을
weaknesses.
올리거나 낮추지
Then we discuss those
않더라고요.
results
너무
as a team. The
이제
final
승률이
step
잘
is to
나오고
compile all of
성능이
that
좋으면
and try to
BR을
find a
올려버려요.
compromise, a
그게
balanced
제일
collective
맞다
decision of some sort. After that, we collect player feedback on the implemented changes,
그리고
and
그
once we
BR
have it,
올리고
the whole
내리는 건
process starts
단순히
again.
성능만 보진
From the
않는다.
outside, it might sometimes look like certain vehicles receive unfair or insufficient attention. That impression can arise because different groups of players tend to show bias towards particular vehicles, classes of vehicles, nations,
그런 거
etc.
있잖아요.
Something that becomes
특정
quite noticeable
소수만
when
하는
analyzing
국가에
feedback gathered
어떤
from various
장비는 안
platforms.
좋은데도
And let's not
오래
forget,
타가지고
the game
잘
already
타는 거
features
있을 수
almost
있잖아.
3,000 different vehicles.
그래서
It's
승률이 좋은
entirely
걸 수도
possible that
있거든요.
something slips through the cracks.
감안해야
That's
돼요.
why we always encourage you to take part in the discussion of
이탈리아
BR
부분이나
changes.
뭐 이런
Share
거
your
있잖아.
thoughts, agree or
실제
disagree with
타보면
other
안
members of the
좋은데
community.
유독 그것만 좀
We
잘
make
타는
every
사람이
effort to
있더라고요.
listen carefully to your feedback and take
그리고
it into
유저도 얼마
account.
없어서 그 승률을
When
많이
will we finally
표현합니다.
get proper big maps for MBTs? Or even
탑
finally a
MBT를
tank
위한 대형 맵
RBSB
나오나요?
EC mode?
The game already features ground maps of all kinds of sizes, from 1 by 1 kilometer or a bit larger all the way up to 4 by 4. All of them are equally present in the map rotation pool for high-level tank battles. However, it's important to understand that because players can use the
모든
map filter
맵은
system to
탑
exclude
탱크까지 다
locations
달릴
they
수
don't
있다.
enjoy, the effective map pool, as I mentioned earlier, can become noticeably smaller. But that's not because of any sort of developer-run dictatorship. We don't have much say here. It's the result of what is effectively honest,
뭐 일단
democratic voting by the
그거는
players
이
involved in this
이야기를
game mode.
들어보니까
As things stand
맵
now,
뱀픽
the reality of tank
정도로
battles at
충분히
high
해결할
levels
수
is that
있는 것 같다
most
이렇게
players
이야기하는 것
prefer
같습니다.
smaller maps and faster-paced matches, ones that relatively often end with one team being pushed back to its spawn simply
개인적으로
because the
공중전에서
distances between
시뮬맵
them
좀
are so
줄였으면
short.
좋겠어.
Adding extra
싫어.
spawn zones
하기
to
싫어.
such maps isn't really feasible. There's simply not enough space. And even if we somehow
그
did that,
방가도 꼭
those
한두
new spawns
대가
would quickly
드롤링하면
fall under the control of the
잡기가 너무
dominant team
힘들거든.
anyway, given how short the engagement distances
근데
are.
요즘 벌칭도 너무 힘들죠.
Will the basement guy ever be released?
지하실에 사는 사람이
I asked you
불리할까요?
not to include this question. Why is it here?
자, 자 마지막 이야기는 아마 불법 프로그램 사용한 사람들 풀어주나요? 그 이야기 같습니다. 아무튼 Q&A 봤는데 일부는 이미 어저께 만들었던 영상에 실제 답변, 그러니까 해결 방법이 도입된 것도 있었죠. 답변도 있었고요. 그리고 뭐 좀 궁금했던 것도 있었고, 우리가 궁금해하는 거 좀 아쉬워하는 이야기들이 질문을 많이 하네요. 자, 아무튼 그 요런 좀 어떻게 보면은, 자, 이 형님 이름이 뭐였지? 까먹었다. 다시 한번 들어봅시다.
Вячеслав Буланников.
자, 볼라니코프 형. 자, 볼라니코프 형 질답 잘 들었습니다. 자, 올해 업데이트가 아직 한 번 남았거든요. 업데이트 잘 마무리되길 바랍니다. 끝.